Hi friends, today in this lecture we are going to talk about which is recently used in the NTA UGC NET English syllabus. This new topic is Indian English history, evolution and its future. So in this audio lecture we are going to discuss in details why this topic was introduced in NET, because if you look at the English language, we find that in this globalized era, English language has a great importance and it is a universally accepted speaking language. But we know English is not an Indian native language. So it is really to understand what was the intention of British government to introduce English in India that we discussed in the first video lecture series. British introduced English in India for their own sake. So we discussed the history of English in India at the last lecture. Now we're discussing the pre-colonized, colonized and the post-colonized era or the post-independence era. Let's start from the beginning, how the status of India changed. How the native language affected by the introduction of English language. Okay, this is all about the historian evolution. And we are also going to talk about the language policy of Indian government after independence and conflicts that arose out for it. Let's start with the inception of English education. Now, if you remember, East India Company came to India in order to start their trade. When East India Company came into India, they decided that let's lay down the first blueprint of English education in India. So it was in 1792 when the director of the East India Company, Charles Grant, laid down the first blueprint on English education. Now, what was the intention of the Charles Grant to introduce English education in Indian society? Because he wanted to change Indian society morally, socially, and mentally. According to Charles Grant, Western knowledge as the medium of instruction would help Indians to remove superstitious beliefs from their minds, and this superstitious beliefs was very prevalent among this uncivilized Indian at that time. So he introduced Western knowledge in India in order to remove the superstitions from the minds of the people. So the initial motive of imparting English education was religious. People like Lord Macaulay and William Wilberforce and Charles Grant, all three of them keenly interested in the spreading the Christianity through Western education. So that was the primary motive of them, was imparting Christianity in the natives of India. So, English language introduced in India, and it was known as Christown. That was what people usually called it. So Charles Grant introduced it in 1792. Then what happened during the period of 1772 to 1785? There was a governor who is very famous in the entire colonized period. That was none other than Warren Hastings. Now this man had respect the Indian tradition and culture. He encouraged the Oriental learning. If you remember my audio lecture, English in India, I describe about what is Oriental culture. So Orientalism is basically having respect for the Eastern tradition and culture. So Warren Hastings had a different view, and Charles Grant believed that Indian society is morally, mentally corrupted, and because of this, he wanted to impart Christianity through English education. On the same time, Warren Hastings believed that Indian tradition is really prioress. So he says that let's not convert the Indian mind through religious English education. And that is why there was a conflict between the Christian missionaries and the governor policy. missionaries kept criticizing the policy of the governor, and this led to very distant relationship between the government and the missionaries. Because the main motive of missionaries want to convert the entire world into Christianity. So during this time of 1792 to 1813, the East India Company, who is led by Governor Warren Hastings, didn't allow the missionaries to work within its territories. So the inception of English education came with the director Charles Grant, and that he was not able to work properly because of the influence of Governor Warren Hastings and his respect for the Indian tradition and culture. So this is how Indian education system was somewhere getting affected by the English education. But then there are a lot of other things which led to the propagation of English education. We are going to discuss it in the next video lecture. So that's it for the section. We will meet soon in the next video lecture. So stay safe, keep learning, and stay tuned to KeyNotes.